I never imagined my life would turn into this, a tangled mess of secrets, forbidden feelings, and a truth so raw, it threatened to tear my world apart. It all started the night I heard her in the kitchen, whispering to herself, her voice low and trembling. Emma wasn't just my stepsister. She was everything I wasn't. Confident, outgoing, the kind of person who could walk into a room and own it without even trying. When my dad married her mom 2 years ago, I thought we'd never have much in common. But over time, things changed. We started talking more, laughing at each other's stupid jokes, and before I knew it, I found myself looking at her differently. Differently in a way I knew I shouldn't. It was late, past midnight, when I heard the soft clink of glass from downstairs. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a chaotic mess as they always were these days. I knew it was her. Emma had a habit of sneaking downstairs for a midnight snack when she couldn't sleep. Normally, I'd ignore it, but that night, something compelled me to get up. I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The kitchen light was on, casting a warm glow into the hallway. As I got closer, I heard her voice. She wasn't talking to someone, she was talking to herself. "This is crazy," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. "Why am I even thinking about this?" I stopped just outside the doorway, my breath catching in my throat. I knew I shouldn't be listening, but I couldn't stop myself. There was something in her voice, something raw and vulnerable, that made it impossible to turn away. "I can't," she continued, her words trembling. "It's wrong. So wrong." My chest tightened. What was she talking about? I leaned closer, careful not to make a sound, but before I could hear more, the floor creaked under my foot. Emma froze. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence. I stepped into the doorway, my hands raised in mock surrender. "Relax, it's just me," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Didn't mean to scare you." Emma let out a shaky laugh, pressing a hand to her chest. "Jesus, Ryan, you scared the crap out of me." "Sorry," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd see what you were up to." She gave me a look, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Eavesdropping, you mean?" "Not exactly," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "But now I'm curious. What's got you talking to yourself in the middle of the night?" Her cheeks flushed, and she turned away, busying herself with the glass of water on the counter. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just thinking out loud." "Right," I said, stepping into the kitchen. "Because that's not suspicious at all." Emma shot me a glare, but there was no real heat behind it. "You're annoying, you know that?" "It's part of my charm," I said, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "So, what's on your mind? Maybe I can help." She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the counter. For a moment, I thought she was going to tell me. But then she shook her head, a small, forced smile crossing her lips. "Don't worry about it," she said. "It's nothing." I wanted to push, to ask her what was bothering her. But something in her expression stopped me. Instead, I nodded, pretending to let it go. "Suit yourself," I said, taking a sip of water. "But if you ever want to talk, you know where to find me." Emma gave me a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks, Ryan." I watched as she turned off the kitchen light and headed back upstairs, her footsteps soft against the wooden floor. I stayed behind, staring at the empty glass on the counter, my mind racing with questions. What was she hiding? And why did it feel like it had something to do with me? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma's face, her flushed cheeks, the way her voice trembled when she spoke. There was something there, something unspoken, and it was driving me insane. The next morning, things were normal. Too normal. Emma acted like nothing had happened, laughing and joking over breakfast like she always did. But every time our eyes met, I felt a spark, a tension that hadn't been there before. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into things. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something had changed. For the next few days, I tried to act normal, to pretend nothing had happened. But every time Emma walked into the room, my heart raced. It was the little things that got to me. How her laughter seemed a little louder when I was around, how her gaze lingered just a second too long, how she'd brush past me in the hallway, her touch sending a jolt through my entire body. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. One night, everything came to a head. I was in the living room, flipping aimlessly through the channels when Emma came downstairs. She was wearing one of those oversized t-shirts she liked to sleep in, her hair loose around her shoulders. She hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment before she walked into the kitchen. My chest tightened. I knew I should stay put, that nothing good could come from following her. But my feet had a mind of their own. I set the remote down and got up, trailing after her like a moth to a flame. She was standing at the counter, pouring herself a glass of water, when I stepped into the kitchen. She looked up, her expression guarded. "Can't sleep?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Something like that. There was a tension in the air, thick and suffocating. I could feel it pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to say something, to break the silence, but the words wouldn't come. "You've been acting weird lately," I said finally, my voice softer than I intended. "What's going on?" Emma's grip tightened on the glass, her knuckles white. For a moment, I thought she was going to brush me off again. But then she let out a shaky breath and turned to face me. "You really want to know?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, my chest tightening. "Yeah, I do." She hesitated, her gaze flicking to the floor before meeting mine. "It's you, Ryan," she said, her words barely above a whisper. "It's always been you." My heart stopped. I stared at her, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what she'd just said. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. Emma laughed softly, a bitter edge to the sound. "Come on," she said, her eyes glinting. "You know exactly what I mean." I didn't know what to say. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, a chaotic whirlwind of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. "Emma," I started, my voice faltering. "We can't." "Don't," she said sharply, cutting me off. "Don't say it's wrong. Don't tell me what I already know." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken, and I felt like the ground was falling out from under me. I wanted to push her away, to tell her we couldn't do this. But then she stepped closer, her hand brushing against mine, and every rational thought I had disappeared. "Emma," I said again, my voice barely audible. She looked up at me, her green eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. "I know," she said softly. "I know it's messed up, but I can't help how I feel." Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt my chest tighten. I knew I should say something, do something, but all I could do was stand there, frozen in place. And then she kissed me. Her lips were soft and warm, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. My hands instinctively moved to her waist, pulling her closer, and I kissed her back with a desperation I didn't know I had. It was like every ounce of tension, every forbidden thought, every unspoken word between us had been building to this moment. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard, our foreheads resting against each other. "We can't," I said, my voice trembling. "Emma, we can't do this." "I know," she whispered, "but I don't care." The sound of footsteps upstairs broke the moment, and we both froze, our gazes snapping to the ceiling. "My dad. He must have gotten up for water or something." Emma pulled away, her cheeks flushed, her breathing still uneven. "We shouldn't," she said, her voice barely audible. "But I can't stop." She turned and hurried out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, my mind racing, my chest heaving. I wanted to go after her, to tell her we needed to stop, that this was a line we couldn't cross. But I didn't. I couldn't. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in my mind. I can't help how I feel. Neither could I. The next morning, everything fell off. Emma avoided me entirely, barely saying a word during breakfast. She kept her head down, her fork pushing scrambled eggs around her plate, without ever actually eating them. My dad didn't seem to notice, but I couldn't stop stealing glances at her, trying to figure out what was going on in her head. I couldn't stop thinking about the night before. The kiss, the way she looked at me, the way her words made my chest tighten and my stomach twist. It wasn't just wrong. It was dangerous. I spent most of the day trying to keep my distance, but it didn't help. Every time I thought I'd managed to push her out of my mind, I'd catch a glimpse of her, or hear her laugh in the other room, and it all came rushing back. By the time dinner rolled around, the tension between us was unbearable. My dad, as oblivious as ever, chattered on about work while Emma and I sat in silence, avoiding each other's gaze. I could feel the weight of her presence like a physical force, pulling at me, demanding my attention. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, she got up from the table, mumbling something about being tired, and disappeared upstairs. I waited until my dad went to bed before I made my move. My heart was pounding as I climbed the stairs, my footsteps barely making a sound. Emma's door was closed, but I could see the light from her bedside lamp spilling out from beneath it. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I knew this was a bad idea. I knew I should turn around and go back to my room. But I couldn't. I knocked softly, my breath catching in my throat when I heard her voice. "Come in." Emma was sitting on the edge of her bed, her legs crossed, a book resting on her lap. She looked up when I entered, her expression unreadable. "What do you want, Ryan?" she asked, her voice quiet. I closed the door behind me, leaning back against it. "We need to talk," I said. She sighed, setting the book aside. "About last night?" "Yeah," I said, my chest tightening. "About last night?" For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched out between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Emma broke it. "I meant what I said," she said, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I took a step closer, my fists clenching at my sides. "Emma, whatever this is, it has to stop. We can't do this." "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "But I don't know how to stop." I sat down next to her, my heart pounding. "We have to figure it out," I said softly. "Because if Dad ever finds out—" "He won't," she said quickly, her eyes snapping up to meet mine. "He can't?" Her desperation was palpable, and for a moment, I felt myself wavering. But then I shook my head, forcing myself to focus. "We can't keep pretending this isn't happening," I said. "We have to deal with it." Emma let out a bitter laugh, her shoulders slumping. "And how do you suggest we do that?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that things couldn't keep going the way they were. We have to try," I said finally. "We have to find a way to move past this." Emma nodded slowly, her gaze dropping back to the floor. "Yeah," she said softly. "Okay." For a moment, we sat there in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on us. And then, without warning, she reached over and took my hand in hers. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything." Her touch sent a jolt through me, and I looked down at our hands, my chest tightening. I wanted to pull away, to put some distance between us, but I couldn't. Instead, I squeezed her hand gently, my heart aching. "Me too," I said quietly. Emma looked up at me then, her green eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. "Right?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "Yeah," I said. "We will." That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way her hand felt in mine, the way her voice trembled when she spoke. I knew we were walking a dangerous line, one that could ruin everything if we weren't careful. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. The next few days were a blur of tension and stolen glances. Emma and I both tried to act normal, but the effort was exhausting. Every time our paths crossed, the weight of unspoken words and unresolved feelings hung in the air like a storm cloud. My dad, oblivious as ever, didn't notice a thing. He laughed at his own jokes during dinner, asked Emma about her classes, and occasionally tried to get me to join him in some mindless chore. I was grateful for the distractions, but they never lasted long. Because every night, I found myself thinking about her. It wasn't just the kiss, though, that haunted me enough. It was the way she looked at me like I was the only person who truly saw her. The way her voice softened when she spoke my name. The way her presence seemed to fill every room, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. One night, after hours of tossing and turning, I gave up on sleep and headed downstairs for a glass of water. The house was silent, the kind of quiet that only comes in the dead of night. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet, filling it from the tap, when I heard the faint creak of a floorboard behind me. I turned to find Emma standing in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression unreadable. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I said, setting the glass down. "You?" She nodded, stepping into the kitchen. "Same." The air between us felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. Emma leaned against the counter, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweatshirt. She looked like she wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. "Emma," I said softly, taking a step closer. "Are you okay?" She laughed, but it was a hollow sound, filled with bitterness. "Do I look okay?" I didn't know what to say, so I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "It's just everything feels so messed up," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I don't know how we got here." "Me neither," I admitted, my chest tightening. "But we can't keep doing this. It's tearing us apart." Emma looked up at me then, her green eyes glinting in the dim light. "What if I don't want to stop?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. "Emma," I said, my voice trembling. "We can't." "Why not?" she asked, taking a step closer. "Why does it have to be wrong? We're not really siblings. It's not like—" She trailed off, her cheeks flushing as she realized what she was saying. I stared at her, my mind racing, my chest tight with a mixture of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. "We can't," I repeated, though my voice lacked conviction. "It doesn't matter if we're not related. It's still not okay." Emma laughed again, shaking her head. "Says who?" she asked, her voice rising. "Dad? Society? Why does it matter what anyone else thinks?" Her words hung in the air, heavy and defiant. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but I couldn't. Because a part of me, the part one didn't want to admit existed, agreed with her. "Emma," I said softly, reaching for her hand. "This is dangerous. If anyone found out—" "They won't," she said quickly, her fingers tightening around mine. "It's our secret. No one else has to know." Her touch sent a jolt through me, and I found myself stepping closer, my resolve crumbling. "This is crazy," I said, my voice trembling. "You know that, right?" Emma smiled faintly, her gaze locking onto mine. "Maybe," she said, "but sometimes crazy is worth it." Before I could respond, she leaned in, her lips brushing against mine. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, but it quickly deepened, the tension between us snapping like a rubber band stretched too tight for too long. I knew it was wrong. I knew we were crossing a line we could never uncross. But in that moment, I didn't care. All I cared about was her, the way she felt, the way she tasted, the way her hands clung to me like I was her lifeline. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard, our foreheads pressed together. "This changes everything," I said, my voice barely audible. "I know," Emma whispered, "but I don't care. Do you?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. All I knew was that I was in too deep, and there was no going back. The days after that night felt like living in a haze. Emma and I both acted like everything was normal during the day, careful not to let our dad notice even the slightest change. But every stolen glance, every accidental touch, felt like a spark waiting to ignite. At night, though, it was different. The walls we'd built during the day crumbled as soon as the house fell silent. I would find myself standing outside her door, my hand hovering over the doorknob, debating whether to knock. Sometimes I did. Sometimes she opened the door before I even had the chance. The intensity between us grew with every passing night. It wasn't just physical, though that part was undeniable. It was the way she'd talk to me in hushed whispers, her words full of vulnerability and longing. The way she'd look at me like I was the only person in the world who truly saw her. The way she'd cling to me, as if letting go would shatter her into a million pieces. But with that intensity came a new kind of fear. Fear of what would happen if we got caught. Fear of what this was doing to us. Fear of what it meant. One night, as we lay tangled together in her bed, Emma broke the silence. "Do you ever think about what we're doing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. All the time, I admitted, my chest tightening. And she pressed, her green eyes searching mine. And it scares the hell out of me, I said honestly. But I don't know how to stop. Emma nodded, her gaze dropping to the space between us. Me neither, she said softly. I don't want to. Her words sent a jolt through me, and I cupped her face in my hands, forcing her to look at me. Emma, this is dangerous. If anyone finds out, they won't, she said quickly, cutting me off. We're careful. No one knows. Her confidence did little to ease my anxiety. It's not just about getting caught, I said. It's about what this is doing to us. To you. To me. Emma frowned, her hands gripping my wrists. What do you mean? I don't know if we can keep doing this without it destroying us, I said, my voice trembling. I don't know if I can. Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. You can't mean that, she said, her voice breaking. Ryan, you can't. I don't know what I mean, I said, my chest tightening. All I know is that this, whatever this is, can't last. Not like this. Emma's grip on my wrists tightened, her expression desperate. Don't say that, she whispered. Please don't say that. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But I couldn't bring myself to lie. Not to her. Not to myself. The tension between us grew in the days that followed. We still couldn't keep away from each other. But there was a heaviness now, a sense of impending doom that neither of us could ignore. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall was inevitable, but refusing to take a step back. Then, one evening, everything came crashing down. It was late, and my dad had gone out to meet some friends. Emma and I were alone in the house, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. I was in the living room, staring at the TV without really watching it, when she walked in. We need to talk, she said, her voice firm. I turned to face her, my chest tightening. About what? About us, she said, crossing the room to stand in front of me. About what we're doing. I nodded, my heart pounding. Okay, I said. Let's talk. Emma hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweatshirt. I've been thinking a lot about this, she said finally. And I think you're right. This can't last. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I stared at her, struggling to process what she was saying. Emma. No, let me finish, she said, cutting me off. I don't want to stop. I don't think I can. But I don't want to keep hurting you either. Tears filled her eyes, and she sank onto the couch beside me. I don't know what to do, Ryan, she said, her voice trembling. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. We'll figure it out, I said softly. We'll find a way. Emma looked up at me, her green eyes filled with a mixture of hope and despair. Do you really believe that? She asked. I hesitated, my chest tightening. I said finally. But I don't know. We sat there in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on us. And for the first time, I realized just how fragile we were, how easily everything could fall apart. But even as I held her hand, even as I felt the cracks forming beneath us, I couldn't bring myself to let go. The evening felt heavier than usual, like the air itself was weighed down by everything we hadn't said. Emma and I sat in the living room, the silence between us louder than any argument could have been. I knew we couldn't keep going like this, but I didn't know how to fix it, or if fixing it was even possible. When my dad came home later that night, Emma excused herself and went upstairs without a word. I stayed behind, pretending to watch TV, but my mind was elsewhere. The weight of her absence was suffocating. I went to bed hours later, but sleep didn't come. I tossed and turned, the sheets twisted around me as my thoughts spiraled. Finally, unable to take it anymore, I got up and headed to her room. The hallway was dark and quiet, the only sound the soft creak of the floorboards under my feet. Her door was slightly ajar, the faint glow of her bedside lamp spilling into the hallway. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the door, before pushing it open. Emma, I whispered, stepping inside. She was sitting on her bed, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes red and puffy. She looked up at me, her expression a mixture of surprise and relief. Ryan, she said softly, her voice trembling. What are you doing here? I couldn't sleep, I admitted, closing the door behind me. I couldn't stop thinking about everything. Emma nodded, her gaze dropping to the bedspread. Me too, she said. It's all I think about. I crossed the room and sat down beside her, the mattress dipping under my weight. Emma, I said, my voice low. We can't keep doing this. It's tearing us apart. She let out a shaky breath, her hands twisting in her lap. I know, she said softly, but I don't know how to stop. I don't even know if I want to. Her words sent a pang through my chest, and I reached for her hand, covering it with mine. We have to figure it out, I said, for both of our sakes. Emma looked up at me, her green eyes glinting in the dim light. What if we can't? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What if this is who we are now? Her question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what the truth was. All I knew was that I couldn't lose her, no matter what it cost me. Without thinking, I leaned in, my lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was as desperate as it was tender. Emma responded instantly, her hands tangling in my hair as she pulled me closer. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise, a confession, a plea. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard, our foreheads pressed together. This can't be our life, I said, my voice trembling. It can't. Emma closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. Then tell me how to let you go, she whispered. Because I don't know how. I didn't have an answer. And for the first time, I realized that maybe there wasn't one. Maybe we were too far gone, too tangled in each other to ever break free. We spent the rest of the night talking, our words soft and hesitant, like we were afraid of shattering the fragile connection between us. We didn't come to any conclusions, didn't find any solutions. But for the first time, we were honest with ourselves, with each other. When the sun began to rise, painting the room in soft hues of orange and pink, I knew things couldn't stay the same. But I also knew I wasn't ready to walk away. That morning, as we stood in the kitchen pretending everything was normal, my dad walked in, a wide smile on his face. Morning, you two, he said cheerfully, pouring himself a cup of coffee. You're both up early. Emma and I exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between us. We weren't ready to face the truth, not yet. But for now, we'd keep pretending. For him, for ourselves. As my dad started talking about his plans for the day, I couldn't help but wonder how long we could keep this up, how long we could keep pretending that nothing had changed, and whether, when the truth finally came out, we'd survive it.